Good evening. I'm Dr. Amitabh Banerjee, as author of COVID-19 Pandemic, A Third Eye. As those who have been following me are aware that I have completed the book reading of the Hindi version, the Hindi translation, that is COVID-19 Mahamari, and now I have started the book reading of the English version, the original English version. And I have already covered two chapters. So today I will be discussing the main points of chapter 3 of this book. The title of chapter 3 is What Explains the Death of Relatively Young Indians to COVID-19. This was written at a time when there was a apprehension and great panic that the next wave, the third wave, the children will be attacked severely. And they also planned children ICUs, children beds, and so during this panic, when I studied the data, I was trying to figure out what should make the children vulnerable or young people vulnerable, young people. And from the data that I conjectured that sufficient data and studies are not there to draw firm conclusions, but a large section of the young are obese, both of them in rural and urban areas, are unaware that they are diabetes. So my concern was that undetected diabetes can be one of the reasons, because particularly the middle class, Indian middle class, are getting overweight. And from the data which we had seen earlier, the Western countries are 3 times more overweight, whereas though Indians are one third overall overweight, according to BMI in India is about 25% compared to above 60% of the Western countries. Overall, the average is 25%, but there is a lot of difference between different socioeconomic strata, and the average perhaps has come down 25 because of the vast underprivileged and marginalized sections who are underweight. And or Indian middle class are rapidly becoming obese, and with that, the non-communicable disease. Another disadvantage which we have is the genetic handicap because of our deprivations in the past, or early child malnutrition, or under 5 malnutrition, or intrauterine growth retardation. This handicap in the form of genetic handicap, which makes people who have faced deprivation, nutritional deprivation in early life, more likely to be early onset of non-communicable disease, including diabetes mellitus and associated coronary artery disease. So we are vulnerable to comorbidities like diabetes and coronary artery disease a decade or two earlier than our Caucasian counterparts. So I had analyzed that way, that in case future pandemics come or COVID becomes spreads fast, or young people will be, particularly the rapidly expanding middle class, will be more vulnerable. The young people in the middle class who are overweight and along with the genetic handicap, that is to be taken care of. And on the other hand, on the other extremes, we have a severe child undernourished. We have the highest child malnourishment rates in the world. And we are daily, more than 2,000 under 5 children die in our country due to malnutrition, undernutrition, against the background of malnutrition and infection, because malnourished child cannot sustain infection like a well-nourished child. They succumb to infection faster. So more than 2,000 children die because of, with a background of malnutrition. And this lockdowns with its loss of livelihoods, business closures, school closures. School closures also may have aggravated malnutrition during this period because there are many government programs like midday school meals and other programs where some amount of nutrition is provided to the children and they were deprived of it. So my concern was that if there is a viral infection, so two extremes, the overweight affluent class and the underweight poor class, they may succumb to it. But beyond that, I noted down the data. Beyond that, there was no reason to suspect a explosive wave confined to children or young people in the third wave. Reason being, when we did the zero surveys after the second wave, equal number of people, children below 18 were also affected, have undergone asymptomatic infection as brought out by the zero. So Indian households are very crowded. So when the virus spread through, it affected the elderly and the children equally. So had the children been vulnerable, the cases would have been the high number of children would have been in the first and second wave also. Why they were not affected was because it was mild in them. There were several reasons for it because they have a very big thymus gland. They have better immunity. Then they do not have adequate number of ACE2 receptors, young people, which the coronavirus latches onto these ACE2 receptors. They have a high level of melatonin, which gives the. So these are some of the reasons why children were not affected. So it was wrongly, there were media hype and there were so-called policymakers who were saying that in the first and second wave, adults were affected. Now children were spared. Now the children are going to be hit badly. So there was no logical reason or scientific reason to suspect a pediatric wave. And the data also between the first and second wave, according to the data and statements by national experts, there was no marked difference in the age profile of people affected with COVID-19 in the second wave compared to the first wave. This was stated in an official briefing around end of April 2021 by Dr. V.K. Paul, a pediatrician, member of Niti Aayog, and Dr. Balram Bhargav, Director General of ICMR. They elaborated that in the second wave, 32% of the cases were below 30 years. 32% cases below 30 years. And keep in mind that our 30 years are much larger population than because we have a younger population. In spite of that, 32% cases were below 30 years as compared to 31% in the first. So there wasn't an increase in the people getting admitted to hospitals age profile. The average age of patients in the second wave was 49 years compared to 50 in the previous year. So only 1 year age difference. In the first wave, there were 4% of patients between 0 to 19 years. In the second wave, it was around 5%. So there is just marginal differences. And since in the second wave, large number were affected. So as our demography has got more younger people. So it is likely that in the hospital beds, it appears that the children are more affected. But if you calculate the denominator, you may find perhaps it would have been lesser if you see the whole denominator, because the denominator of young people would be much larger than the denominator of older people, given our demographic profile. So this caseload, and while the 20 to 40 years bracket comprises 25% caseload in the second compared to 23% in the, so there was only marginal difference in the age profile. So it cannot say that there is a reason to fear that the third wave they will be still younger. So why the panic? So this I had question in the column, why there is a panic? What makes us think that third wave would be in children? Including an amateurish editorial in Lancet. Lancet was also writing, just like armchair epidemiology or laptop epidemiology, they were projecting doomsday for India. In fact, even afterwards also they said India has underreported the data, which is not substantiated by hard data. They are just making models and projecting doomsday. The speed, spike, and bounce of the second wave took everyone by surprise. Let us analyze our strengths and weaknesses. And as I had already explained, the strength and weaknesses are, our strength is that we have a very young population, so which can cushion the pandemic and which cushioned the pandemic compared to other countries. Like most Asian and African countries, we have a demographic advantage. We have a broad base of young adults and children to cushion the full impact of mild to moderate pandemics. Sweden, I have given example, which did not close schools during the pandemic, supports this proposition. In spite of schools being open throughout, there was no excess morbidity or mortality among the Swedish school children or the school staff, including the staff also. So that speculation that, okay, children may not suffer, children may transmit to the adults, that is not borne out by the experience of students. Because children are not infected, even if they get infected, they will not, viral load will be less. Even viral load is higher, their height is less. The adults are taller, so when they cough, they can't go against gravity, the droplets, whatever you call it. Comparison of overweight prevalence based on body mass index show that countries in the West had overweight prevalence around 60% compared to around 20 to 25% in Asian and African countries. Age and obesity drove mortality rates from coronavirus 10 to 20 times higher in the developed world compared to developing countries, which I have already discussed earlier. Two outliers countries provide clue to this question with interesting contrasts. Japan has the highest age profile, but the obesity profile is one-third of the West. Their mortality from COVID-19 was 15 times less than Western countries. In fact, when I analyzed subsequently, most of the deaths in Japan was after rollout of mass vaccination, which is again a paradox I have projected many times. The strongest piece in Japan appeared to be overall good health as evidenced by low body mass index of the population. The other outlier country was Brazil, which holds important lessons for India. I have given example of Brazil as a lesson to India. It had lower age profile compared to the Caucasian Western Hemisphere. Brazil in South is a younger population, but obesity profile is similar to the West. Almost 60% of their populations are also overweight. Why? Because there are a rapid developing economy like India. And when this rapid economy, the blue collar workers, they have disposable income. So they indulge in fast food, sedentary lifestyle, rapid lifestyle changes. And they are more prone to the central obesity and overweight, diabetes, coronary artery. Brazil had a high obesity level. And like India, it is a rapidly developing economy with change in lifestyle, physical activity, and diet. The mortality from COVID-19 in Brazil exceeded that in many Western countries. It went beyond Western countries, particularly subsequently. Obesity proved to be a greater driver of lethality than age. And when I had written this column, I had put the link on LinkedIn. And I got a communication from a doctor in Brazil, and she communicated that what we have written, we are seeing in Brazil, most of the hospital beds are occupied, the ICU beds and serious cases are overweight Brazilians, obese Brazilians who are suffering the most. And she really got fascinated when I wrote this, that she found that her people are not are vulnerable because of obesity. And on the other hand, I was on a panel just when the vaccine was being rolled out. I was on I was moderating an international panel where there was a panelist from Japan. And when we were considering that who should get the vaccine first, just before the rollout of the vaccine somewhere in December 2020, Japan took little time to roll a vaccine. I was, as a moderator, I was asking him from the data, why do Japan need a vaccine? Because just before the vaccine rollout, the data is still in the public domain. The rates of Japan, there were hardly any cases of COVID-19 in Japan before the mass rollout and hardly any deaths. I was asking, without vaccine also, we are doing so well. And after the vaccine, when the deaths, anybody can see it, this data of Japan, and it raises serious questions about the impact of mass vaccination. Japan is an example where before the vaccine, the less number of cases, and after the vaccine, more. They had a minimum obesity compared to the West, highest age, but they were doing so well. So that only indicates, it sends a message that overall health, lifestyle is more important to fight against this pandemic and future pandemics also. Will future pandemics affect the young? While overall we have a lean population, there is a tendency for the recently affluent population to adopt sedentary lifestyle, fast food, alcohol, and smoking. Moreover, due to genetic handicap, Indians are more prone to diabetes and diseases of coronary artery disease a decade or two earlier than their Caucasian counterparts. So these are some of the handicaps. That's why we have to take more care. What is the way forward? We have to beef up the public health infrastructure equitably and address the lifestyle changes among the newly affluent. A number of students in our field practice area brought out these incipient trends among the youth and young adults. A number of studies, not students, a number of studies in a field practice area, in a department and in a urban field practice area, or urban community and rural, we carried out some studies. One study we did, we found that younger generation are 4 times more likely to be deficient in vitamin D compared to the older generation. This is a published study. We found that the students are 4 times more deficient in vitamin D compared to the faculty. So yeah, and though initially there were some doubts whether role of vitamin D, more and more studies are establishing that vitamin D deficiency can predispose to viral infections, including COVID resistance one. And what we did in the lockdown? We put everybody indoors. No sunshine. You can't go to the beach. You can't go outside, take the sun. And vitamin D went down, perhaps population level vitamin D. That makes and young children, as it is today, in our studies we found they are deficient in vitamin D. So these can be the reasons I had predicted that you have to. These are the gaps we should fill up. That young children, from our own research, we found they are 4 times deficient in vitamin D compared to the adults, because we are becoming a more. In our time, we used to spend outdoors. Nowadays, they are indoors in school. After school, they are in coaching classes. They hardly get any sunshine. And because of affluence, they go in their cars and all. They don't go in two-wheelers or cycles. So vitamin D, कहाँ से मिलेगा? Where they will get the vitamin D from? Diabetes was fairly prevalent in our rural and urban population, and more than younger people, like 30 to 40 years, diabetics and hypertensive were not aware of the diabetics and hypertensive station. So we said that this hidden burden of diabetes and hidden burden, and particularly in the younger people, 30s, 40s, because they are getting, this can make us vulnerable because the COVID attacks the comorbid people. And that this type of finding was in USA also, where the underprivileged people had a severe COVID, and it was found they did not have access to health services, care of hypertension, care of diabetes, particularly the colored people. Risk factors of non-communicable disease were prevalent both among urban and rural youth and young people. Central obesity, waist hip ratio, BMI, we did that. They were equally, they are getting obese. Childhood malnutrition remains quite high, as brought out in studies by our postgraduate and faculty. We did carry out childhood malnutrition, and we found, and any viral infection can affect the undernourished as well as the overnourished, obese. We lose about 2,000 under 5 children every day due to preventable disease against a background of child malnutrition, loss of livelihoods, and interruption of child community nutrition programs at the community level, like midday school meal, Anganwadi, will increase child malnutrition and child deaths. While pandemics may be mild on the child with normal nutrition, severe malnutrition in children may make them vulnerable. So my worry was that if the pediatric wave comes, we have to take care of the malnutrition first. Don't bother about the beds and vaccines. And If we do not address these concerns, we may have future pandemics in which young people and children will bear the brunt not due to lack of vaccination, as the present amateurish consensus seems to suggest, but as a result of not addressing the modifiable risk factors. And in the beginning, which I did not mention, but just to wind it up, I had compared the fascinating discipline of epidemiology with chess. The epidemiology sees the whole board. As doctors, we all start with clinical medicine and the majority continue in this stream. Few choose epidemiology and public health, the least glamorous and somewhat abstract discipline. Even during pandemics, eminent clinicians were sought for their views, being well-known public figures. So this is the transformation from clinical medicine to epidemiology is akin to a chess player evolving to master's level. In pandemics, clinicians and epidemiologists will have different perspectives. It's a matter of perspective. It is what you see that shapes your perspective. Clinicians contributed immensely in the crisis, some with their lives also. As a result, treatment regimes got refined and case fatality rates came down considerably. However, they are not ideally positioned to see the dynamics of pandemics in the population. They have vision is limited. As epidemiologists, we see the whole pattern and we see the relation between the different factors, just like relation between chess pieces a grandmaster sees. So this is what I was trying to convey during the clinicians become celebrity doctors and their views were given more weight. And epidemiology and public health are abstract disciplines. In fact, before the pandemic, even my family members were not aware what I did all my life. So idea is that if we are preparing for future pandemics, we have to have a good epidemiologist. We have to have good public health focus, and we have to consider all the factors. Now, what is the focus nowadays? We have one virus on one end and vaccine on the other end, and there are gaps in between. Not knowing nothing about what's happening between these two ends, we keep on blindly, and that's why one. It's just like playing a game of chess with just one piece. You only want to hold on to the queen, which is the vaccine nowadays. So I have ended it like if an amateur strategist will look only at the major piece, the new queen or new virus or new vaccine, we may be left holding the queen but losing the game. So this is how I ended this, and I hope I have been able to convey the big picture. And I hope that in future pandemics, we see the big picture and overall health uh, will be the best defense against disease X pandemic, whatever it is. And that's all I wanted to convey in this. Thank you.